Now we're going to make this one a little bit shorter and sweeter because it really isn't that hard to attract more bucks to your land if you follow some pretty basic principles of deer biology. More bucks on your land, you can fit more bucks on your land, but you have to take the female social pressure out of your land. And that's very critical. Considering young bucks and yearling bucks, how can you attract those? Yearling bucks disperse an average of about 1.5 miles from their mothers. Now, 1.5 miles could be a long distance in hill country. It could be further in swampland, open hardwoods, where there's not a lot of habitat changes and not a lot of deer. But this yearling bucks will disperse about 1.5 miles on average. And sometimes in areas where bucks, there's not a lot of winter kill, deer don't need to learn how to get to the deer yards. Deer and bucks will even disperse at the age of a fawn. But definitely a yearling, when it's 1.5 years old, they're dispersing. The mothers are kicking them out of the herd. Have you guys ever seen where you have an actual doe and a fawn is trying to mount that doe, and that doe is kicking it away, and eventually that young buck disperses because of female social pressure? So what happens on your property if your property is dominated by does and fawns? Then why is that dispersing yearling buck going to choose your land? And the answer is they're probably not. They just left an area because of female social pressure. The last thing they want to do is find your parcel that's full of female social pressure and stay there. They just left because of that. So young buck magnet, when you think of building a buck herd, in the UP of Michigan, for example, in 99, 98, we had one spike. I had 3 pictures of. I found 1 rub, 1 scrape. Fast forward to 2006, we had 17 different bucks, passed up 11, shot 2, and just an explosion. But an area where you only feature 1/2 a fawn per doe going into the winter, half of those fawns die. And so really you're looking at 1/4 of a fawn per doe going into the spring that's going to be a buck. So not a huge buck population. In areas of ag land, sometimes a doe is going to have 2 buck fawns, and they're going to make it both through the season. So in better areas, there's a lot more deer to deal with and a lot more bucks and potentially young bucks. But in some of these northern regions where I was at in the UP of Michigan, I built the buck herd on that property not by fawns that were born there, but by fawns that were born in other places that chose to call my property home. And the reason they chose that is sometime in November, December, I'd see a brat pack of 2 or 3 little young bucks, spikes and 3 points and 4 points up there. They're all hanging out together on this little plot, in a little tiny 1/4 acre plot, and the rest of the deer herd was somewhere else. Maybe the doe was centering around the big food plots. I had 14 plots on that property in the UP that I developed. You know, I told the story before, 65 tons of lime, clearing 1 tree at a time. It was a labor of love. And I had 8 acres total. You'd find those little bucks taking over a small plot simply because there were numerous food and cover choices, and they could find locations that they found attractive that weren't dominated by female social pressure. You know what would happen, those little bucks, if they were on a plot like that, 1/4 acre, it's early December, and a doe family group comes through, a couple boss does and their offspring, going to run them right off there. The does will run the bucks off. Does rule. Female social pressure, always think about that. So again, going back to, you want to attract these yearling bucks to your land. And if you're the one doing that, and you have numerous food and cover choices, and you're managing your hunting pressure, which is always, again, the lowest hole in the bucket, then you're going to be able to attract those young bucks to your land. We're just focused on young bucks. We're not focused on necessarily how you hunt, how your land's laid out, or anything, but you're creating an atmosphere that you allow those young bucks to come onto your land and not experience female social pressure. Number 3, remove the doe factory. Get rid of it. If you are the one that has all the does and fawns living on your land during the summertime, that means you're probably not going to be the one having all the mature bucks on your land during the fall. Does that are here today are here to stay. It is a very real problem. It's something that's easily recognizable. Just go to many different deer habitats across the country, look at these situations, and if you can imagine those young bucks, again, they're leaving because of female social pressure. Last thing they want to do again is come into a property that's dominated by female social pressure. Again, they just left. Doe factories are created when you have high quality summer food that doesn't need to be there, adjacent to high quality cover that's geared towards the fall and winter. When you have high quality fall and winter cover, you have high stem count, you have lots of browse. When you have summer food and you have that kind of cover, you create the perfect fawning grounds. Does like to hide their fawns in very thick, high stem count density cover. It could be grasses, weeds, briars, harder to regeneration, but something that disperses scent and something that makes it easy to hide fawns so they don't die. So if you're giving them that high quality summer food source, you can pack does onto your property and actually repel a lot of bucks. And sure, they might come through during the rut, but what I find is that there's a fraction of the number of bucks that'll be on your land during the rut when you have too many does. You want that balance. There's certainly a number. When you have too many does, you're going to have very few bucks. When you bring that number of does down, you'll have more bucks. It gets to a point where if there's no does on your land, obviously that means you have very poor habitat. You're not managing the hunting pressure at all, because does can take a lot of pressure and a lot of risk for them and a lot of stress. And so if you don't have does on your land, you're not going to have bucks. So there's certainly a number of does that reflects the level of attraction that your property ultimately is, and that will determine if it's a balance, that you'll have your balance and your optimum number and your highest number of bucks. But again, the higher, once you pass that balance, and if you look at it, you kind of look at just right here, here's that optimum number of does, here's that level, and then bucks. Right there, that's going to be the best number. Highest number of does, highest number of bucks. Whatever that point is, right here in a scale, once you go above that number with your doe population, then you can expect your buck population to go proportionately down, because it's all about space and stress. When you think about it, going back to number one tip to get more bucks on your land, focus on those yearling bucks. It's something you could build a buck herd quickly. You have to do it with numerous food and cover choices. You have to always consider why those yearling bucks are leaving their mother in the first place, that female social pressure, and then really attack and get rid of that doe factory during the summer. The number one form, or the number one way to reduce doe populations is to get rid of the summer food. You're not helping those deer during the summertime anyways. It all sounds real warm and fuzzy to say I'm helping antlers grow, I'm helping fawns get bigger, when really during the summer there's so much food that you can't actually put a dent in their actual summer force, unless their summer health, unless you're actually putting them in a cage and giving them pellets and creating an unnatural situation. So you're not going to actually improve the health of the herd. So if you have too many does in your land during the summertime, those are going to carry over into the fall. Get rid of the doe factory. Make sure you have choices for young bucks when they're dispersing. They don't want to come into your just one giant food plot that's dominated by does. Hunting plots help serve the need for that. Outside elbows in your food plot system, separation of food plot system, elevation changes in your food plot, brush islands to separate deer. You can fit more deer and certainly more yearling bucks. And that's it. Just focus on that for right now. There's a lot of other ways we can get into advanced, where the way you hunt, the actual food choices that you have, and the cover that you can work on. There's so many other factors of this, but number one, if you get back to just think about young bucks, why they're dispersing, and why you can capture them or not on your land this summer and fall. There's some very specific reasons that you're going to attract bucks, but it always goes back to female social pressure. Think of why those bucks left in the first place, and think, how can I make this property comfortable for attracting young bucks? And I think this flips over to public land. If you think about that, there's always a lot of parallel concepts that work for public and private land. Where you find the greatest level of diversity and habitat change on public land, and you find those core areas that aren't spooked out by people, then you're going to have a lot more options than you're just feeding on one oak flat or one good location. I know of a stand of white oaks in Ohio, in southern Ohio, way back in the woods, and it's a small little area, and yeah, there'll be rubs and scrapes around there, but I always look at it like that area's got to be dominated by female social pressure. I've seen a lot of does and fawns around that area, and that's the best food source in the area. They're going to attack it, and it's small, and that's about it. I'm looking for large, big habitat change, big clear cuts on public land, diversity of food sources, food plots on private land. You find that diversity, you find those choices, and you're going to attract those yearling bucks this fall and actually build a buck herd that will reach that optimum number and the best level and best number of bucks that you can have on your land for this hunting season. Now, as we transition into habitat season, I hope you've had a chance to check out my web class, How to Design Your Whitetail Parcel. It's on my website, whitetailhabitatsolutions.com. I have a link in the description, and I hope you can find it, check it out, and enjoy it this year.